everyone. I would like to welcome you to the sixth time of this webinar. We will be debating the motion discussing that parliamentary democracy requires the immediate sovereign referendum to decide on important issues. Are there any questions? Okay, so without further ado, I would like to welcome the parliamentary prime minister to open the meeting.
What the proposition team stands for today is the power of the people, and the power of the people to decide on some things that really have impact on them. What we believe today is that sometimes there is a need for these decisions to be made by the people. There are some important issues that the people should decide upon because there is a risk that the representatives do not actually represent the views of the population. But firstly, before going into my arguments, I would like to clarify what we understand by this motion today. So, saying parliamentary democracies, we refer today to all the true democracy that actually have a parliament. By sovereign referenda, we refer to a referendum where the population is asked a question and they have to give an answer yes or no. And sovereign means that the result is going to be binding. Therefore, the parliament definitely needs to implement the decisions of the people. But when we say important issues, we would like to refer on things that really impact the society and the people. Thank you. Like constitutional issues, like foreign affairs issues, like treaties, also laws and moral issues. Like basically everything that the parliament thinks that there is a need for a referendum, or the people propose and ask for a referendum by a petition. And if they have the necessary number of signatures, which varies between the states, we think that the people should definitely go out there to the referendum and decide on that important issue that they think that needs attention. No, thank you. What we actually want to promote today is the fact that this referendum is going to improve the legitimacy of the state in front of its people by preserving this close relationship between the states and the population. What we actually want is to get a balance between this direct democracy and this representativity where people elect their leaders and they say their opinion only once in 4 years, which we think that it is not enough. Now, passing on to my arguments, I'm going to talk about, firstly, about empowering the people. Secondly, about the civic sense. And the second speaker shall talk to you about how philosophical turn practical. Now, firstly, let's look at my argument about empowering the people. So we see that in this moment, people elect their leaders. And why do people elect representatives? Well, because the leaders are actually most capable and they're really qualified. So, you know that it's also more time efficient than to ask on every single issue the population. So we think that this is definitely more efficient. But by this means, we know that the people give the power and the responsibility to their leaders. So they actually believe that their leaders are going to represent their own beliefs. But our problem today is that there is some kind of inconsistency in the system. Because once in 4 years, we think that it is not enough in order to represent their opinions. Because we know that decisions cannot suit perfectly. Because we know that when a person gives power to its representative, we know that it can't give it completely. Because the representative represents like a large number of people. So there may be some people from those range that may not agree upon some issues. So we believe that in issues that are so important, that are of general interest, and that definitely impact every single person, we think that the people or the parliament should call for a referendum because we think that we should keep the population in charge. And we see that in Switzerland, this method actually works. So we see the fact that like from 1980 to 1998, there were 461 mandatory referenda and 86% of them passed. So we see the fact that people actually promote things, actually have initiatives, and we believe the fact that it's really important for them to do that. So we know that in the moment when the people do that, the state is going to become more legitimate in front of their people. Because the state will give the message that yes, we accept the opinions of the people also. No. a vast majority of Americans in the 60s would have voted for segregation. What do you think is a legitimate trampling of minority rights? Please, ma'am. We do not live in the 60s anymore. And we believe that in this very moment, there are some laws and there is some common sense. So we believe that what the people vote are not some segregation issues, and we believe that when people actually ask for a referenda, it is done legally, so we believe that these things cannot happen. Moreover, we are aware of the fact that when there are some contradictions between what the state promotes and between what the people want, and when the people cannot express their opinion because they can only do that once in 4 years, we know that there can be some conflicts between those two parties. So we refer to the fact that that's why people protest, that's why there are conflicts, and we think that these protests actually impede any kind of progress in a democracy because people cannot actually express their opinion clearly and pass over, but they have to put pressure, and the leaders must decide again. So we think that these things actually impede the progress, impede the democracy, and create more dissent on the population. Now, passing on to the second point, which refers to civic sense. And here I'm going to have two sub-points. First, I shall talk to you about exactly how people are going to be more civic sensitive. And secondly, I shall talk about how we're going to find solutions more easily through our measure. Now, firstly, we see that when people are going to be greatly impacted by this measure because they will see that their opinion really matters. And it doesn't matter only formally, but it actually matters practically. And we know the fact that when people are actually going to be involved, and when the state is going to let them express their opinion clearly whenever needed, we are aware of the fact that people are going to keep track of everything. So we know the fact that people are going to become less interested in the decision-making process, which is exactly what we want. Because on the other hand, in the system, in a moment, sir, in the system when we have once in 4 years, we know the fact that in the meantime, people can actually never care about what happens. So
in Switzerland, your ideal model, the last referendum had a 38% turnout. How does this empower people or reflect a promotion of civic involvement?
I'm very sorry, sir, but we actually have a counter statistic to that. We know that in Switzerland there are some referendums like 6 times a year, and we know that like in every referendum there is like a 45% turnout. But we know that generally per year the turnout is always greater than the 45%. Which shows us exactly that people go to those referendums that they're interested in. So they may go to somewhere when they're not interested. They say I can't go, but they can go to those that they have information about. And we say that this is really important because this shows the involvement and the implication of every single person. Now the second sub-point refers to finding solutions. And we know that when there is a referendum, the people in power start debating and start expressing their opinions, pros and cons. So we know that the more debate leads to greater solutions and leads to a greater democracy because more discussions are going to further lead to more legitimacy in front of their people. So because we have expressly told you the fact that the people need to have the power and that they have to express their opinions when their opinions and their leaders are not the same, we think that we're definitely going to achieve a greater democracy and a greater civic sense. For all these reasons, we beg you to propose.
Thank you very much for your speech. Now I would like to call the opposition leader of the president.
What's popular is not always right. In support of this basic principle, team opposition is putting forward 5 objections against sovereign referenda. I'll prove to you that first, referenda hamper governance. Second, that they aid and abet the tyranny of the majority. And third, that they polarize society. My second speaker will show that legislators are better equipped to make decisions and that sovereign referenda lead to voter conflict. But before that, I'm going to ask 2 questions of the case of team proposition class 5. 1, do they empower people? And 2, do they promote civic sense? The answer to both questions is no. First point, on empowering people. And here, we saw a proposition which made a series of blatant assertions. First and foremost, their entire argument was premised on the idea that in a parliamentary democracy, there was an issue with representation. Because we only go to the polls once every 4 years. No, ladies and gentlemen, even though we only go to the polls once every 4 years, politicians always have an incentive to ensure that the decisions they make are aligned with the will of the people. Why? Because they know that they are going to be voted out of office if they go against the will of the people who seated. So thank you, madam. And that's why we say that it's untrue that the system of parliamentary democracy does in fact exist. But even if we accept that in some instances, politicians do not always abide by the will of people, we think there are perfectly legitimate reasons why this is the case. And I'm going to disregarding the views of those in the margins. For instance, following the Scottish referendum in 2014, negotiations for increased devolution have ceased, and as a consequence, the main players have now been split into yes and no camps. Clearly, we think that this goes against the spirit of democracy in bringing citizens together. For all these reasons, we say what's popular is not always right. Don't vote for sovereign referendum. Sorry.
Team opposition clearly does not understand what democracy is principally and fundamentally about. They don't understand the implications of actually letting the parliament and the politician decide their own power. And this is what team proposition believes it is fundamentally wrong. So in my speech, I'm going to have 3 main points. I'm going to talk about true practical democracy. Then I'm going to talk about a true civic sense, and then about philosophical turn practical flaws, and exactly what we desire philosophically at the end of this debate. But first, let's look at what team opposition brought together as arguments. Now, they brought to us the fact that people don't have a holistic view. They don't really understand the macro vision of society. Now, first of all, we don't believe that that is true. We see exactly that during the referendum, people are explained what the issues are about, what the impact of the policy is about. So people actually have this holistic view. But we do believe that they have the right to decide when it comes to their own personal interest, because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about important issues that impact each and every citizen. We do not want to have the representatives fighting over and debating over and over again the issues that they cannot, that they cannot decide. Because the decision should be in the hands of the people, because the people should have the right to decide their own lives in their own country, because this leads to better responsibility of the people of specific countries. So this is why the act mainly brought to their first point. The second point, which was more important, is exactly the point of the tyranny of the majority upon minorities.
that, look, in France they voted against Muslims, which is, as we do believe, it is only just an example. Because as we see in the majority of democracies that we have today, people already voted for equality. So we don't believe that because it is constitutional, we don't believe that through a referendum you can change that so easily, no thank you. Also, we don't believe that today the important issues are upon this exact things. Even if there would be, we don't see people having this short-sighted view to actually become tyrannical and abuse minorities. People are more empathic than that. People are not inherently evil. Second of all, we see that the important issues in today's society are exactly taxes, are exactly being integrated into the European Union, for example, are exactly the ones that necessitate, like abortion, like moral issues, that people need to decide upon because what we see, as Team Opposition said, and as Team Proposition also said, we believe in equality and we believe exactly in true meaning of choice. Now, this leads me to resustaining my case, but before that, sir.
Explain to me how a common man on the street is able to understand the technical issues behind the constitutional amendment, which involves legal principles.
This is something not that complex. I, as a person, as a normal human being on the street, understand when I am abused by the state. I understand what the meaning of taxes is. I understand what the meaning of integrating in the European Union is. It is not that difficult. People are not stupid in today's society. Now, this leads me to my part of the case. Now, let's look at the first point about true practical democracy. Because the only thing that is it is that, you see, representatives are incentivized to actually act upon and taking care of each and every individual because they want to be re-elected for office. Now, we do believe that that is an assumption. We see exactly that people are corrupted in the political system. And we do believe that this is a point that we need to take into consideration when we're talking about real life. Now, we see exactly that the representatives, even if they care, we believe that in 4 years, I have the chance through a referendum to actually decide upon things faster. Now, we believe that faster policies and faster implementation lead to a better society overall. Now, what we say here is the fact that there are a lot of important issues that divide the representatives into fighting over and over, and it creates more and more confusion, meaning that you don't necessarily reach a decision. As we see in the example of the UK in the 1970s, when they had held a referendum if they should remain in the European community or not. Also, we see that happen in Sweden in the 1980s when they had a referendum upon nuclear energy because the coalitions were split in half and they could debate over and over again. That debate made a better overview for the population and let the population decide exactly upon the issues that representatives could not decide upon. Team Opposition did not respond to that vote. Also, we see exactly that in Switzerland, for example, the turnout of vote it becomes more and more. We have a better representativity in the moment when I have the opportunity to choose exactly the policies that I believe are beneficial for me and for the rest of the society. They did not answer to that. We also told you that the state becomes more legitimate when they ask the population for their opinion upon certain issues. They did not respond to that. Now, we believe exactly that when you offer the power to the people as a state, you have this co-decision between each other, which leads to a better state and to happier people that trust their government even more. And the second point was exactly the civic sense. The fact that people will feel more included in the society and more included into the decision-taking system through this measure. And they did not respond to that, only that, you see, in Switzerland, we don't have voting turnout that much. It's only 45%. Yes, but it grows each and every year. At first, maybe there are 2 people going to the referendum, now we have 45% of the population, and this evolves on and on. Because you integrate people and create the civic sense in actually seeing the policies, not just for my opinion, but the whole opinion of the entire populace. And this is what civic sense is about. Which leads me nicely to my second point about philosophical turned practical flaws. Now, you see that what the core principle of democracy is that there's no leader in a democracy. All people are equal. Now, we believe that when you choose a representative, I'll take you in a second, you alienate your vote, because leaders become first-class citizens, while the ones that are not leaders but just choose are second-class citizens, and I'll explain the implications of that after you see the answer.
So do you believe that the privatization of coal mines in Britain by Margaret Thatcher's government was a good thing for Britain?
Could you please repeat that again?
Do you believe that the privatization of coal mines in Britain in the 1980s by Margaret Thatcher's government was a good thing for Britain, even though it went against the people's will?
That's a different debate. Yeah. We believe that it may have been better if people decided upon it because it was exactly what the people wanted. Now, even if practically it was good, we believe that principially people should have had the right to decide upon that. Now, back to my argument. We believe that when you create first-class citizens, second-class citizens, third-class citizens, and you make a hierarchy in democracy, is exactly when you undermine this specific philosophical analysis of what democracy really is. Now, we believe that you need to find a balance between the two, right and true checks and balances, to decide the power that your politicians have, to decide the power of what you, the people you elect, really have and the power that you have. And through these checks and balances, you create a clear and homogeneous democracy in today's society. Second of all, we believe that the representatives, most of all, work for their own interests. Now we see that they're influenced by lobbyists, they have a lot of corruption. And we believe that through checks and balances, through this equilibrium that we as Team Proposition wanted to achieve at the end of the day is exactly the better democracy that you have. At the end of the day, because we told you that we empower the people, we give the democracy back to the people where it belongs, and because we told you exactly the practical benefits that we have, at the end of the day, we beg you to propose.
Side proposition masquerades behind a veil of rhetoric and false assertions, claiming that they are the side that uphold representative democracy without actually showing us how the model that they are proposing leads to the principles that they assert about. I'm going to be piercing that veil of words in 2 points of contention. First of all, which side better promotes the principles of democracy? Second of all, which side ensures more effective governance? Under the first one, both sides agree that representation is an important principle in democracy. First prop here told us that once in 4 years isn't sufficient because politicians don't always recognize the will of the people, and there's an inconsistency there. They offered us no analysis whatsoever, but why increasing the quantity of votes would necessarily result in greater representation. But let's ignore that. We see that the fact is that the more you increase the quantity of votes, the more voters will be upset with you, therefore the more your democracy will be compromised. Voter fatigue is what results when you force people to come to the polls again and again. Therefore, referenda tire people out. And when people don't turn up for your elections, clearly principles of representation are compromised. This is what I'll be covering in Massive Standard Army. But then they told us something further. They asserted to us that people always have the right to decide when these issues are things that affect them fundamentally. And because these issues affect me as a person, I have the right to decide on them. We say, great, you have the right to have a say, right? So call out your MP, speak out, start a blog, right? Speak up on the platform that democracy already offers you. You haven't actually told us why having a vote in a referendum necessarily leads to you having a greater voice. In fact, we say that in a referendum, you have an even smaller voice because you don't necessarily get to decide whether that issue goes in your favor or not. In fact, that question is determined by all the other people in your state as well. Your decision can easily be voted out by all the other people participating in that referendum. Therefore, their side doesn't necessarily lead to there be more representation and more people having the right to decide on these issues. Next, there is something else that politicians, under our side, politicians decide their own power because politicians have a constitution. We say that reflects a naive understanding about democracy. There are plenty of checks and balances, such as having a plurality in Parliament that will vote down any such legislature that gives parliamentarians more power. Furthermore, at the end of 4 years, parliamentarians who give themselves more power are clearly going to be voted out. That isn't an issue in today's So let's move on from here. We see that there's actually no problem with representation in representative democracies. Legislators have an incentive to listen to their voters so that they get voted in at the next election. They also have an incentive to justify their policies to their voters. That is why we have things like meet the people sessions as well as dialogue sessions between members of parliament as well as people. It's because they can only get people's support and their votes if they justify their views to them. Therefore, their benefits also accrue in representative democracy. There's clearly no need for sovereign referendum. Let's talk about the issue, the model of sovereign referenda itself, because they haven't actually justified their model. Our first opposition speaker told you about the tyranny of the majority, about how the majority is allowed to impose unreasonable views on minorities, like the ban on the burqa, like the ban on immigrants. Their only response was that people are not evil. People have common sense. But you see, it's not just a simple matter of people being evil or people not being evil. It's more nuanced than that, right? People trample on the rights of the minority insidiously because they believe that they have the right to do so just because they are the majority. We're not saying that they are evil, we see that they are compromising on minority rights. Therefore, they haven't tackled the heart of the issue. Last time at this point, we actually talked about civic involvement. They told us, oh, people go to vote a lot, therefore they'll become ideal citizens. Why? Being flooded with information repeatedly, having to go to the polls again and again, is bound to engender resentment in people because they've already elected representatives to make these decisions.